Have you ever heard of Rocky Marciano, boxing's most ruthless champion? He was known as the Brockton Bomber because he knocked out a lot of his opponents. But what made him stand out wasn't just his impressive record of never losing a fight, it was his unique and intelligent approach to fighting. Despite being only 5 feet 10 inches tall and having shorter arms than some of his opponents, Rocky was one of the strongest hitters in the heavyweight division. His punches sometimes looked like they came straight out of a comic book. But what people often forgot to give him credit for is his intricate footwork that complemented his wild punches really well. So, if you want to learn more about Rocky Marciano's fighting style, stay tuned until the end because there's a lot to unpack. I once showed my friend a video of a famous boxer named Rocky Marciano. When my friend saw the video, he thought it was from an old movie and not a real fight. Rocky Marciano was known as the Brockton Bomber because he knocked out a lot of his opponents. He fought against some of the best boxers in the world and is the only heavyweight champion who never lost a fight. It is said that Rocky had a special heavy bag made for him that weighed 300 pounds to help him train. This is probably why he was able to knock out 43 of his 49 opponents. It's impressive because Rocky was not a typical heavyweight boxer. He was only 5 feet 10 inches tall, which is short for a heavyweight. He also had shorter arms than Manny Pacquiao, who is a famous boxer too. Despite his size, Rocky was one of the strongest hitters in the heavyweight division. To put it simply, his punches sometimes looked like they came straight out of a comic book. Marciano was known for his incredible endurance, which allowed him to maintain his intense fighting style for the entirety of a fight. Even if his opponent had a strong defense, Marciano's constant barrage of punches would tire them out and render their arms useless. Canelo Alvarez has also employed this strategy successfully, using his stamina and powerful punches to wear down opponents. Despite his aggressive style, Marciano was not a mindless brawler. He had a unique and intelligent approach to fighting, which allowed him to overwhelm opponents while minimizing the damage he took. He was especially effective as a shorter, stockier fighter, using his ability to close distance and land devastating punches to bully his larger opponents. Throughout his fights, Marciano balanced his aggressive style with smart defensive tactics. Although his punches were always thrown with knockout potential, he was careful to set them up in a way that minimized his own risk. He used head movement to create distance and put more momentum into his punches, which allowed him to land devastating blows without taking too much damage himself. Most boxers move forward with their front foot first, but Rocky did the opposite by moving his back foot to the front. This footwork is similar to Smokin' Joe Frazier's style. It was a subtle step, but it allowed Rocky to cover a lot of distance and hit harder. Rocky's exaggerated head movement and unusual shuffle step helped him throw his two most powerful punches, the right overhand and left hook, with maximum force. When he wanted to throw the overhand, he would lean back while shuffling towards his opponent. This movement also helped him stay defensive. If his opponent tried to hit him with a jab or cross, Rocky could easily avoid it without changing his position too much. He could either ride the punch back or shuffle away. This movement pattern helped him load up a lot of power punches, especially his Suzy Q cross and overhand. When he leaned back, most of his weight was on his rear foot, so he only needed to shift his weight forward to throw a powerful punch. Rocky's backward-leaning advance resulted in some beautiful counterpunches in the heavyweight division. Rocky had his unique way of throwing a punch. Instead of twisting his back foot to put his hip behind his cross, he would step into his cross to allow more flow through. However, this can cause him to lose balance and be vulnerable to his opponents, but Rocky had a way of turning this disadvantage into a safe exit. After throwing his cross, Rocky would move to a southpaw stance by lateral shuffling and then pivot back to an orthodox stance. This strategy was later used successfully by other famous boxers like Roy Jones Jr. If the opponent retreated, Rocky would move forward into southpaw to chase them down and turn his powerful left hook into a shifting rear hook. Rocky's hook was just as destructive as his rear hand. He would start by moving his head deeply and exaggeratingly to build momentum and distance. Instead of going for an overhand, he would weave to the inside, disguising the beginning of his hook and building momentum. Marciano had a unique way of throwing his hook punch that made it very powerful. he would crouch down low and then quickly spring up while throwing the punch. This made the punch cover more distance and hit with more force. Other boxers like Floyd Patterson would copy this movement later on. Rocky's opponents were often afraid of his hook punch and his overhand punch. He would use exaggerated head movements to set up these punches, and his opponents would be conditioned to think that this movement was a warning sign. This would make them back themselves into corners, which made it easier for Rocky to land his punches. To protect himself while crouching, Rocky had a unique blocking style. He would use his rear hand to parry punches, but he would let it travel so far over his center line that it turned into a rear cross block. This was an unusual technique, but it worked well for Rocky. Ken Norton would later use a similar block to stop Muhammad Ali's jab, but he would do it from a more upright position. Rocky had a unique but effective way of defending himself by using his lead inverse elbow block. Instead of just raising his elbow during his shoulder roll, Rocky went further by completely ditching the roll. This move helped protect the lead side of his head while he crouched. Even if his long-range power shots didn't work, Rocky had another strategy. He would get in close to his opponent and use his shorter arms to throw quick punches that could do just as much damage. Rocky knew that he had an advantage with his shorter and stockier frame. He didn't need to keep his opponent at the end of his jab like a taller fighter would. Instead, he would get past his opponent's jab and then use his shorter arms to throw quick punches. He was also good at using angles to gain an advantage. Rocky was skilled at blending defense and offense. He would step or shuffle into his punches, which gave him momentum to drive his head into his opponent's hips or his shoulders immediately after throwing a punch. This move kept him safe and unbalanced his competitors. You can see an example of this in a clip where Rocky uses the momentum from his stepping overhand to crash his head into Azar Charles' hip, which stopped Charles from countering. Rocky used his head position to control his opponent's movements during fights. He would place his head on his opponent's shoulders or hip to guide them off balance or make them back up. If his opponent tried to counter wrestle, Rocky would push his head up across their chest to expose them to headshots. Rocky also manipulated his opponent's guard by inserting his arms between their guard and cracking it open to create targets. He would often disengage from his head position and land a punch on the same side, but his head blocked his opponent's vision. This tactic required skill to avoid accidental headbutts. Rocky's best moves came from combining his head movements with his wrestling skills. He would weave from one head position to another, throwing punches while pinning and smothering his opponent before they could react. Sometimes, he would weave over or under his opponent's head like Robert Duran. This technique took practice to avoid getting fouled or injured. Rocky had a unique fighting style that involved crossing the center line at both long range and close range. But what people often forget to give him credit for is his intricate footwork that complemented his wild punches well. Instead of just charging ahead, Rocky used his shuffle to move laterally and make subtle adjustments, which helped him to get past his opponent's guard and land punches from unexpected angles. Unfortunately, people don't fully appreciate Rocky's skill because his style was so different from what they were used to. Even those who recognize his abilities tend to focus only on his knockout power and stamina and don't look beyond that. But Rocky's success proved that their style was effective. He was a powerhouse, a skilled fighter, an in-fighter, and a strategic thinker. Even today, it's worth studying Rocky's approach to fighting. Rocky Marciano's legacy as a boxing champion will forever be remembered. His unique fighting style and strategic thinking are still studied by boxers today. We hope you enjoyed learning more about this legendary boxer. Thanks for watching.